So this lady over here, her name is Jeanne Calment. And she holds the record to be the oldest person to ever lived, and that's verified, even though that there's some scientists out there who beg to differ. But nonetheless, there are people out there who live up to be 100 plus years. And in Jeanne's case, she lived up to be 122 years old. That being said, the life expectancy in the United States is projected to be about 78.93 years of age. What if I told you that there was a way that you can surpass this number over here, and it all has to do with the function of an organelle? And if I told you to close your eyes right now and go back freshman year of high school in bio class, and then your teacher told you, does anybody know what the powerhouse of the cell is? You might all recall right now that that would be the mitochondria. So if you want to add more years or possibly surpass what the current life expectancy claims to be, all you need to do is improve your mitochondria function as a whole. So how does the mitochondria and aging go hand on hand? Well, that's about the topic I'm going to talk about today. And it's about how you can age gracefully if only you can maximize the mitochondria function as a whole. And then a little infograph in the back, I kind of like it because it shows two sections. One is you're young and the other one as you age. And if you don't do anything great, if you don't do any exercising at all and you just live your life as it is right now, obviously we all know that your muscles as you age will obviously decrease. And then here is the most important thing that I actually like. As you age, your mitochondria lowers in numbers, DNA mutations, increase in autopsy, impaired autography. What does that all mean? Well, we'll talk about that later down in the slides. So first we need to discuss what the function of the mitochondria actually is, and then talk about what causes this dysfunction, and then talk about a phenomenon called mitochondrial biogenesis, which I feel in my mind that's the key to longevity over there. And then finally wrap up with some tricks and tips on how to improve your mitochondria to its upper limit. So before we move on, we actually need to understand a little bit of the functions, or at least a refresher. So in simple terms, the mitochondria takes the energy from the things we eat and converts it into ATP, and then it's used by the cells to carry out its various functions. So over here in this picture, it shows, the little syringe and the person actually feeding its mitochondria. That's kind of similarly what it's doing. So imagine the syringe as the food that you ate for breakfast this morning, and that is actually broken down into edible food that your mitochondria can actually eat. And as I stated earlier, that edible food is called ATP. And after ATP is produced by the mitochondria, it's used as various functions like walking, running, talking, or pretty much anything that you do in your everyday-to-day life. That being said, each individual cell in the body has different amounts of mitochondria, because obviously we know that their cell requires different energies to perform. So for example, muscle cells need a lot more energy, hence it requires more mitochondria, whereas neurons don't need as many. Mitochondria can't be created from anywhere. It needs energy to support the cell, so it either does one or two things. The first thing, it either grows bigger, or the second way, it meshes up with other mitochondria, which I guess hence it grows bigger, but in a different way. Not only does the mitochondria help produce an energy, but it's also responsible for autopsy, which we talked about earlier. And autopsy, in simple terms, is the removal of dead cells in order for new cells to take in that place. And it's also used for storing calcium and heat production. So now that we have a rough idea, or at least a general refresher of what the function of the mitochondria is, now let's dive into what the dysfunctions are and what causes it. As stated earlier, the mitochondria makes ATP, and during this process there is waste left behind, and that waste or byproduct is called reactive oxygen species, or ROS for short. And ROS is harmful to the DNA of the mitochondria and other cells. So this brings me to the next image of why is there Earth and a bunch of vehicles there. Well, think of it as a mini analogy. So think of the mitochondria as any vehicle of transportation, whether it's the boat, the car, or the plane. And the waste that's left behind is the emission, obviously, and think of the emission as your ROS. And as I stated earlier, too much emission is really bad for the environment. So think of the environment as the DNA of the mitochondria, while the other cells, think of it as us. Too much emission is bad for the human population as well. So this is where scientists start to come and think of the first theory of how we start to age, because of how damaged it is because of too much ROS being emitted into, the mitochondria itself and how properly it functions. That being said, the mitochondria runs better when fat is the one supplying the source of energy, and the more fat you burn in your lifetime, the healthier you will be, and then that will ultimately lead to fewer ROS being produced, which will lead to a healthier mitochondria. And as we know in KN 230, I believe, that fat yields more ATP compared to sugar. So back to the analogy of the mitochondria being the car or the vehicle of transportation. Obviously, the vehicle doesn't run by itself. It needs some type of fuel to actually get it started. And that fuel would be either the gasoline, which would be the fat, or the diesel, which would be the sugar. And don't get me wrong, you can actually start your vehicle with diesel, but we all know that if you use diesel, it's going to be really harmful to your car, and then ultimately you have to bring it into the shop and all that type of stuff. And obviously it costs a lot of money, but the safer option and the more efficient option is using gasoline, which is fat, which the mitochondria actually preferably likes to use, but sugar is the most accessible one that burns really quickly. So believe it or not, the hypothalamus is the main reason for why the majority of the human population tends to be in sugar burning mode, because it tricks the body into thinking that it's in starvation mode. So there are three main reasons why you're stuck using sugar compared to fat. So the first reason is because you either stressed out too much. And the easiest way to explain this is if you think back in primal times when we were cavemen, and the cavemen actually saw some sort of imminent threat, which will either be a tiger, a lion, or something like that. So think of that imminent threat they see. They either have one or two options to actually take into consideration. One of them either fighting it, or B, either running away from it. And whichever option you decided, whichever path you decided to actually take, you need this quick burst of energy to actually either swing your arms and actually fight it, or use your legs and move it as fast as you can to actually run away from it. And as we recalled back, I believe like 5 slides ago, sugar burns faster than fat, and it's used in times of emergency. That's why when you're stressed out too much, it decides like, oh, we either got to do this fight or flight mode, and it uses sugar compared to fat. Number 2 is because you have too much blood in your sugar. You have too much sugar in your blood. Because it believes the body is in starvation mode, and via damaged receptors, which the receptors would be leptin. And it's not because you can't use fat for fuel, it's just you damage the receptors, causing you to actually have to use sugar as your main source of fuel. And number 3, I feel that it kind of goes almost hand on hand with number 2. It's because you're obese. Your body becomes leptin resistant because of the excess fat, so it desensitizes the ability to recognize it. So if you have too much fat in your system, body is like, oh crap, there's too much fat here. It becomes really sensitive. It's like, oh, I don't know if this is fat, or that's fat, so you need this source of energy. And if your body's way too confused to actually recognize fat or sugar, it takes too much time to actually recognize that fat. So I'm like, oh, sugar is the easiest option. It's also another option we can use. So we'll use sugar to actually carry out our functions. Causes of this dysfunction may be because of, number one, you have too much sugar in your body, as we discussed one slide ago. It's either because you're stressed, the diet you have because you have too much sugar in your blood, or because you're obese. Number two that I actually found pretty interesting that I actually didn't know was you have too much protein in your diet. And number three, which is kind of the obvious, but not too. So now that we have a clearer understanding of what causes mitochondrial dysfunction, now we need to talk about the key to longevity, and that would be mitochondrial biogenesis. Mitochondrial biogenesis, in simple terms, is the creation of new mitochondria, but that just can't happen from nothing. Because the mitochondria has its own set of DNA, so the new mitochondria are produced by adding new content, which would be the protein membranes, to pre-existing mitochondria. Cells quickly adjust to whatever energy supply they have disposed to them. For example, in the short supply of glucose in the cell, it switches gears and uses fat to fuel them. That is looking in the short time frame. But when you look at the prolonged time, the cell either needs to do one major thing, and it's to increase its ATP capacity. This is where mitochondrial biogenesis comes into play, because it not only is in response to metabolic challenges, but is also to maintain mitochondrial integrity. And this quote over here I like because it kind of breaks down all the scientific terms and brings it into play terms that everyone can understand, because I'm pretty sure majority of us experience it in their everyday lives. So think of the mitochondria, instead of this time being the source of transportation, think of it as your muscles. So we go to the gym because we want to get stronger and fitter than we were before. And when we lift weights, we're still able to lift weights, but not at the capacity that we want to. So say I wanted to bench press 2 plates and I was only able to do a plate before. Still able to do its function, but later down the road I need to get stronger, so my muscles need to recuperate more energy. I need to be able to do more heavy loading, and say half a year later I'm able to bench press now this 2 plates because my muscles got bigger and stronger, and it's using my energy more efficiently than it was before. Same thing with the mitochondrial biogenesis. Short time, mitochondria can still supply the energy, but once we're talking about more high intensity type things, your mitochondria needs to increase its inventory of how much energy capacity that can actually sustain. So this is where the notion of the mitochondria being more fitter and stronger comes into play. Mitochondrial biogenesis, along with mitography and fission and fusion, is essential for mitochondrial homeostasis. It repairs the network by getting rid of the old and renewing it with the new. With this, it improves the function and may slow down the cascading damage caused by mitochondrial dysfunction, which is one of the 9 hallmarks of aging. So over here, I like to bring it back in simple terms. So like I talked about, repairing its network. The typewriter over here is the old version of the mitochondria. It's still functional, it still does its job, it just may be a lot slower, less productive, but with biogenesis coming into play, it transforms mitochondria A into mitochondria B, which would be the laptop over here. Like I said before, it still does the same function as its older counterpart over there, but it's just better, it's lighter, it's more efficient, it's more quicker to do its job. And as I talked about over here, mitochondrial dysfunction is one of the 9 hallmarks of aging, which would be seen over here. And along with this over here, these are the 2 things that you can actually control, but a lot of people focus more on this rather than mitochondria dysfunction as a whole, but it's actually a lot simpler to actually manage and to actually age gracefully than being a slouch back elder. No offense to them, but it's the only first thing that came in mind. And here's some quotes over here about mitochondrial biogenesis. It's more scientific terms. It's not really too important to actually understand the co-activators and all that, but I just found them really cool, short, interesting things. But if you want to pause the video and actually read them to actually get the best info out of them, but that's really not that important. The most important thing over here is first sentence over here. Behaviors including exercise, fasting, and cold exposure can help promote healthy aging. The rest of them just talks about scientific terms, but if you actually really want, this is the most important quote out of the three. So now that we actually touched about what mitochondrial biogenesis is, I bet you're thinking, how do I improve my mitochondrial function? And it's actually a lot more simpler than you actually may be thinking right now. So in order for anything to actually work, you need to actually get out or minimize yourself of being in this sugar burning mode. Being said, you would need to manage your stress, reduce your sugar levels, and reduce obesity. And you may be thinking, oh, that actually sounds familiar. Yeah, and it actually is because this is the main reasons why you're stuck in sugar burning mode. So if you want to actually get out of it and use fat, you need to actually target everything to a source of its problem, and those are the main sources. Oh, I forgot about this one. For healthier aging, we need to use ourselves and selectively get rid of the old mitochondria, replace them with the new ones. So this is talking about mitochondrial biogenesis. One of the quotes I forgot to mention earlier. This is where the notion of autography or adipose comes into play over here. So like I said, here are some things that you can actually do to actually manage your stress, whether it's doing exercise, reading books, spending time with friends. But the main source that's actually beneficial to managing stress is you knowing your own body. You actually know yourself better than anyone else, so you know actually how to manage and keep yourself cool down in stressful situations. But over here, some of the main common things that people do to reduce their stress levels. Alright, so one of the ways you can transform yourself into a fat-burning beast is by lowering your ROS, and it is done with intermediate fasting. With this method, you're ultimately going to reduce your caloric intake and being more mindful of the things that you're going to eat. So intermediate fasting has two types, and the first type is alternating day fasting, and the second is time-restricted feeding. First one is pretty much simply as it sounds. You eat what you do in one day, and the next day you don't. Next day you eat whatever you do, next day you don't. But I remember this one is because Jonathan talked about this one about your time feeding window, and this is where time-restricted eating comes into play. You eat whatever you do within. So over here, if you're just starting off, that 4 to 8 hour window is pretty extreme, and a lot of people it's not going to be too doable. But if you just reduce whatever your normal time feeding window is just by an hour, it's going to do the same effect. And then gradually you'll lower yourself down into that 8 hour window time, and obviously the effects will be talking for you. But this 4 hours kind of, I feel like it's the low end, and it's kind of too extreme as well. But if you're just in that 8 to 10 hour feeding window, be good enough. And if you want to actually take it up a notch, add this with the Ketogenic Diet, and the effects will be doing the talking for yourself. Because it will force your body to use fat for fuel in the long run, ultimately living a healthier and longer life. And as you can recall, fat is actually better to use because there'll be less ROS buildup in your body, living a healthier life. So over here it just shows you the breakdown of how the ketosis actually works. So it's almost hand-on-hand same thing, but instead of using carbs as your source of energy, or to get to your source of energy, you use fat. So that's why you need to do a high-fat diet. And this is where the myth that eating a high-fat diet is really bad for you, but it's actually really not, because it actually reduces your sugar levels over here, and then it releases the triglycerides, as we talked about earlier in, I believe, KN 230, and then the fatty acids travel to the liver, and the liver produces ketones, which will be used for energy. And over here, ketogenic diet, how much fat is actually used compared to protein and carbs. A lot of people kind of take protein as the main source of their food, but in the ketogenic diet, it only makes up a fourth of what you can actually be eating, and the majority of your focus should be towards healthy fats. And over here, it's some of the things, or the kind of foods that a ketogenic diet kind of requires: the big no's and the big yes. So if you want to pause the video and take a look at it more closely, you can. Another thing you can actually do is exercise regularly. And when you exercise hard, your body needs a ton of energy. With the high demand of energy, the body signals the production for the mitochondria to keep up with this high demand. Specifically, high-intensity exercise helps burn fat, improves insulin sensitivity, and stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis. So exercise is really great. It's kind of the key for almost anything, and I feel like it should be used as a prescription of medicine, because it kind of reverses some of the effects that you've been doing back in your sedentary lifestyle that, if you implement it now, can actually have a big, profound impact. And over here, exercise training has effects on biogenesis, fusion, fission, and mitography. And with conjunction of all of this, adds more mitochondria to your body, helps remove it so the mitochondria, the healthy mitochondria, take up space, and it can actually enhance your function and performance as a whole. So those are the best answers to help keep your mitochondria at its optimal function that is in your hands. So today we covered what the functions of the mitochondria is, what causes the dysfunction, a phenomenon called mitochondrial biogenesis, and we talked about some tricks and tips of how to improve its function to its upper limit. So if you want to add more years to your life, or possibly surpass what the current life expectancy claims, all you need to do is improve your mitochondrial function as a whole to age gracefully. Some actions are things that happen in the gym and out. Aging is a process that's coming whether we like it or not. But if you take charge now, your biological age can say something different from what your chronological age says. And I believe that's the end of the slide. Oh. And over here, some of the foods that you can actually eat to help your mitochondria as a whole. And I believe that's it. And I also have a little summary sheet that kind of summarizes all the major foods to actually help your mitochondria as a whole. But over here some pictures, but I'll post a link down there. So like I stated earlier, there's going to be a link or some way that I'm going to post my little summary sheet that talks really broad in detail of what I talked about today and some of the foods that actually can help you in your everyday life that you can actually implement starting right now, this moment. And besides that, that's the end of my slides. So hopefully all this actually becomes really useful and you actually take in consideration all the things I talked about today and how you can actually age gracefully. So hopefully this information helps you down in the long run, and it all starts with you.